The Media Project. With fast-moving and sweeping changes to our economy in the works, we all need to reconsider how our investments are best placed. At Partners in Housing, we believe your money is best placed locally. Utilized to increase value and provide stable and desirable housing to your neighbors. Contact Partners in Housing to find out how you can participate in local housing opportunities by joining the Partners in Housing Fund. Look us up at partnersinhousingvt.com or email us at partnersinhousingvt@gmail.com.
Well, you are listening in to another Innovato 2 podcast. Our listeners in Vermont and our listeners afar in all of the little corners of these United States. I'm your co-host, Scott M. Graves. I've got another member of the Innovato 2 crew here from the other side of the mountains over in the junction that is the White River Junction. I have
Ryan Munn here.
Ryan Munn. There you go.
Awesome. And really excited for today's recording. We are talking with an entrepreneur in Vermont, a seasoned entrepreneur, no less, someone who has been there, done that, and is doing it again. So really excited today to introduce Byron Batres, our very own Burlington entrepreneur, office resident of Hula, a really great innovation and co-work space up there in Burlington. And Byron has founded and exited a company called Easy Probate, and currently is the founder and operator of Scrivener. Both really cool, somewhat related enterprises, so really interesting progression going on here. And thank you for joining us today, Byron. Really appreciate having you.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, and I'll let you tell it because I always feel like the guest tells it best. Share with our listeners a little bit of your background, your sort of initial professional background, where you come from and where you started in your career.
Sure, I'll give you kind of the Reader's Digest version of where I'm from and all that. So I was born in Guatemala, kind of moved from there to Mexico City, DF, as they used to say, Distrito Federal. Came to the United States when I was about 5 years old, just outside of Philadelphia. I kind of consider myself from Philly more than any other place. Obviously, deep ties to Guatemala and Mexico just because family. And in Latin America, you have family that's technically not family, but I got a lot of uncles and cousins that are not blood related that, like we treat them as such. And so my education, I went to Penn State. I was actually a science major. I was pre-med, which then I switched that to physiology and a business minor. Also minored in Italian, which was totally cheating. It's Spanish with hand motions, as I call it. And so my first job out of school, actually, I was the pharmaceutical sales rep, and that's what led me to Vermont. So I was very fortunate to be able to pick where I wanted to live. Of course, this in the late 90s, huge boom. I remember getting a signing bonus when I got hired, a moving allowance. Of course, back then I owned a bag of socks. And so those two helped me put a down payment on a condo and then, put some roots down here. The reason I came to Vermont is I love the outdoors. I guess I did at this age. And as busy as you are as an entrepreneur, I do less of the fun stuff that I used to do. But kind of my passions are ice climbing, mountaineering, rock climbing, anything outdoors, hiking, kayaking. So that's really why I came here. We used to go to the Adirondack Mountains and the White Mountains, and obviously Vermont's smack in the middle, so a great place. And then my journey from an entrepreneur really starts when I switched careers. So when I met my wife, I met her January 26th. 2 weeks later, which was actually 1 week later, our third date, 1 week later, third date, I say to her, let's quit our job, sell everything we have, and travel for a year. She was crazy enough to say
That's a very entrepreneur's way of looking at love. I know that, right?
yeah. Yeah, I'm a closer. And so we did it. We sold everything. We got married in June of that year while we were traveling, and then literally ran out of money, broke. So broke is when I come back to Vermont, and that's when I got the great idea to become a financial advisor. I was like, I don't have any money. I should definitely tell people how to manage theirs. So I became a financial advisor. I started with Morgan Stanley. I guess not so fun fact, I was the last graduating class at 2 World Trade Center. And so I literally left August 28, 2001. And then I got home. I literally got my first yes September 10. I remember getting the paperwork, getting a check for $5,000, coming really early, September 11th, kind of typing everything up, depositing it, and like, yay. And then like literally the world is kind of collapsing around us. And so, that had a formative experience when it comes to me as a financial advisor. Just it was a rough go, but in some ways a really great time to start that advisory business. I became a certified financial planner in 2003, had a really successful career. And then in the middle of that, around 2012, I became an executor. I became a trustee. And that was one of the hardest things that really anybody can do. From that experience, because it was so hard, I decided to do something about it. So when that led to me launching Easy Probate, which was then the world's first do-it-yourself probate. The idea is really simple. A lot of people can't afford legal services, can't afford the attorney. If you can't afford an attorney, who's there to help you? And so it's taken the kind of TurboTax-like concept and putting it to legal actions. Prior to that, really most legal tech was like, you do something, give you a document like an LLC, like a will online, and then it sits in your drawer. So you never know if it's good or not, because by the time you need it, you're dead, right? So we were the first legal tech company that went to court, which was a whole different animal. We can get into that later.
So like you're kind of hitting on some of the color there, right? Of really what informed your mission to increase access to legal services, right? So, it sounds like there's a lot of professional things, that whole experience of becoming a trustee in particular after becoming a financial advisor. What were some of the challenges that you experienced, hands-on before you actually launched your company? What were you really feeling for clients or even in your own experience that really illustrated that challenge?
So when I did my work, my case, when I was the executor trustee, I think the biggest challenge when you're in that space is probably like 3 different parts. Part 1 is the most obvious, the actual technical legal work that has to be done. And so obviously finding out what forms have to be filed with court, how do you how do you prove the will to be, all those things, right? I knew all the theory, right, for 2012. So I would have been an advisor, certified financial planner for about 10 years at that point. So all the theory I had, but it's not like I went into it blind, which is probably why I was able to find out relatively quickly how to do it. So that actually, honestly, was the easy part. The hard part is dealing with the family. Our specific situation, my wife's father was a beneficiary. He was not well mentally, at least in my opinion, and I think there's diagnoses that probably can prove that, but definitely had substance abuse issues, which were huge red flags. Lived with his mom at 65 years old, had no money, had no job. And those are always now I know, but those are always the red flags of how things are troubling. And so when that happens, then there's a problem. That becomes the challenge with probate. And then you start adding I'm also running a business, or as an advisor, you're basically your own business, even though you work for somebody. I had kids, it's there's a lot to be happening all at once. And then you add the fact that most people can't afford the upfront cost of an attorney. which was not necessarily my specific case, although certainly coming up with probably the $10,000 out of pocket costs that the attorney wanted at that time certainly would have been not fun, for sure.
Still hurts for sure. And you can feel the pain. And, imagine, I think I heard the statistic you might have even mentioned at some point of some 8% of people actually have the money even available to go ahead and pursue the things that they need to do to get this done.
Yeah, so the stats are, this is from the Federal Reserve, I believe it's circa 2023. The stats are 50% of U.S. adults don't have $1,000 at the ready. What does that really mean? It's not like so obviously in your bank account ready to withdraw and not bounce a check, right? But it may mean that you have equity in your house. It may mean you have a 401k it's just not very liquid. So 50% of U.S. adults don't have $1,000 at the ready. To get to the standard $5,000, which is your more prototypical attorney retainer fee, about 70% of U.S. adults don't have that. And then 92% of U.S. adults don't have $10,000, again, at the ready to be cashed out with very little consequences, to do what is the most common higher end of what's needed to start a probate case.
And we can't choose whether or not it's a quote unquote straight ahead case or like for so many of us, because life is complicated, because people are complicated. It ain't as simple as applying and getting something out of probate, right? There's familial, there's all kinds of challenges, legal challenges. I mean, to your entitlement.
Well, I would say this: most cases get resolved without anything extra other than the normal probate stuff.
But that's still like around $5,000, right? You're still paying a retaining fee and using.
Forget again. That's everything I mentioned. That's for your brother, sister holding hands, skipping in a flower field. Anything that becomes litigious, obviously just add tens of thousands of dollars to that total.
Wow. So here we are, 2012, you're going through this experience. You get through this experience and then decide to start Easy Probate. Is that kind of how things went? Or
not so direct, but yeah. So have you ever had one of those moments where you're like, oh, this is the problem? But then you're like, how many times, number one, outside of me being either involved in Easy Probate, I've never been an administrator executor, like again, since, right? Stats are most people never are. Typically one family member is chosen, and then you have 2 or 3 siblings. So only one out of the, say 3 or 4 max siblings is going to be chosen. So very, very, very few people are ever chosen, let alone chosen more than once. I think what was happening is because I was in a unique position as a financial advisor. And of course, our demographics as advisors are always, we have like 80% of our customers are probably over 65. So we normally have clients who die. What would happen is the first people to be called after someone dies is typically where the money is. It's like, hey, mom died. Can I access her bank account or investments to pay for the funeral, to pay for the attorney? And so typically what we would do is be like, sorry, we can't give you access. You don't have the legal authority. You need to do probate. You need an attorney. That's the standard response when anybody talks to a bank, financial advisor, because that's usually what has to happen. And so because I was in that position, I remember getting the first call from my first non-family member person saying, hey, grandma died. Here is the actual situation. Her mom died. So it was my friend's mom who was my client. So his grandma, so they call her Magoo. And so Verda is my client, her daughter, calls me up and said, mom died. What do we do? And I had already set them up with a trust. Here's some other facts. Ready? 70% of all trusts go unfunded. And so what happens is you set up a trust, but then you have to fund the trust. You have to move your house the title of your house into the trust. You have to change your bank accounts. You have to change all this stuff, and a lot of people don't. And so
they literally think they have a trust, they're all set, and they just do most of it.
Correct. And also a lot of people think I have a will, then they can just have that will and go to the bank and be like, look, the will says I get it all, give me all the money. But obviously you have to prove a will to be valid, and it's a court process. And so she had done the financial stuff correctly. That didn't go through probate. So in some ways, there wasn't a crunch for money, although any expense to somebody who's now, going to be living off of an inheritance and such, was any expense was too much. But the house really was the issue that had to go through probate. And so I remember she calls me from the attorney's office, kind of like in the lobby. She's like, the attorney quoted me $20,000 to probate a $300,000 home in the outskirts of PA, almost woody rural PA. She actually lived in a log cabin. It was kind of cute. And so the attorney wanted 20,000, and so I knew her really well. I was like, no, don't do that. I was like, you slap that attorney, get out of his office. I'll help you do it on your own without an attorney. So that was my first, just because somebody asked for help, I helped. That was the first time I did that for somebody without an attorney. And then just because I had an ear for it, like whenever a client would call, and I'll be like, I know what to do. I can help you. And so I would just offer the help, never charged. I remember helping about 6 or 7 people going through probate in various different states. I was like, these are the same dumb forms every time. I was like, I bet you I can create a TurboTax like system. And so that's really when I had the idea. That was probably like 2014, 2015. But put pen to paper, started to like learn to code, if you will, learn to, be a software-ish person. I'm not really that, but I learned enough to launch my first MVP website with basically $2,000 cost.
Wow. So now you were able to do this in part because you weren't charging, right? Like if you had been like, oh, don't pay me for me, then you would have been in stick.
The first call when someone dies is where the money is. I was where the money is, right? And so I was having clients. And so how many clients did I have? I probably had I don't know, typically you have 600, maybe, of all sorts and sizes clients. Yeah. And so I had a pool of people that inevitably somebody would die. So just some stats, I think roughly 1%, kind of generally speaking, of the population dies in any 1 year. And obviously the older that population is, the higher that percent is. That's all US, given the kind of distribution of age. The older you are, the more likely you are to not live the next 5 years, right? And so the histogram of where people die, roughly 78 to 82, 80% of all deaths happen right in that zone.
Yeah.
And then obviously it trickles off.
So were you actually doing it for them? Like you're doing the paperwork, or you're kind of guiding them?
I can either confirm or deny.
Yeah,
that I'm just kidding. So everything I joke is, we'll get into this later. There is this concept of the unauthorized practice of law. I don't want to get into too much details, but in some ways it makes sense. Think of if you were to be accused of a crime, like murder, right. You don't want to jamoke like me representing you in court, right? There has to be some threshold.
My cousin Byron coming to my financial planner, pseudo attorney coming to save the day.
Yeah. So that's clearly representing you in court is no one would argue. But then it starts to get really, really gray of what is legal advice, what is the practice of law. And if it's filling out forms, the equivalent of filling out a DMV kind of application or a passport these are all technically legal documents, by the way, right? It becomes very, very muddy. And so, again, probably you'll ask this later because I think it's a very part of our growth story. It just becomes gray. So, helping somebody complete the forms was a statutory Supreme Court ruling that is not the practice of law. So we know this from numerous kind of events. In fact, there is a standard called the Scrivener standard. A scrivener is somebody that's allowed to prepare legal documents at the request of somebody else and it not be the practice of law. It's called the Scrivener exception. And so there is very strong precedence of this. So obviously now you have things like LegalZoom, Rocket Lawyer, all sorts of online legal entities that prepare documents for you, and it not being the practice of law.
So in other words, you figured out how where that gray area is, where that fits. And then you built a piece of software. And I'm just going to say it like this for those, budding entrepreneurs out there. You built an MVP, you went and found investors, and it was sunshine and rainbows from there, right?
Yeah, no, definitely not that. So, but essentially, the short version, right? Yeah, it was easy as.
So I want to ask though too. I mean, comparative to other target markets, there's a level of predictability in this market that even if so, I can see where investors are either going to be in strong potential investors or not, based on this is an area of digital investment I'm into or not. But no one can deny the potential marketplace. Like this potential marketplace, to me anyways, as a mentor of businesses, feels like it has a lot more definition than a lot of other prospective markets. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but that's us talking in 2025.
Yeah.
When if we were to do the Wayne's World and go back in time.
Nice, right?
And so in 2016, 2017, when I had this idea and I started to pitch, at that time, no legal startup had gone to court. LegalZoom had gone and won, mind you, but had 16 state Supreme Court fights for their constitutional right to do what it was already proven to be allowed. And so I think there was this world of hard for me to specifically say, but I would say we were not treated like what a brilliant idea.
There must have been some trepidation. People were waiting to see, right? They wanted to see the outcome of cases.
I would definitely say bootstrap. Listen, I had tons of supporters. By definition, had enough support to get me where I am. But I also say there was a lot of just brute force strength that I had to carry anybody, kicking and screaming in a way to where we ultimately got.
What's your average savings to a client?
So we like to say in the old days, easy probate, because this is how the product worked. So very much like TurboTax, you went to our website, you filled out a questionnaire, and then the automation spit out, like, here's your petition packet, here's the instructions. At that time, we were charging, when I started, $500 for full probate. I think $100 for what we call a small estate. That's kind of defined by each state threshold, but generally speaking, let's just say 50,000 and under is a good kind of rule of thumb, and no real estate, right? That's a small estate. So that's when I first started. And so compared to the prototypical attorney, again, no fights or whatever, on average nationwide is about 10,000, all things considered, attorney's fees. And then you add another, let's just say 3,000 to 4,000 of administrative expenses, which would be court fee, newspaper announcements, and then if you have to have a fiduciary bond, which is kind of like insurance against you kind of stealing the money, I guess. And so on average, obviously, we were saving people almost $9,000 compared to a standard attorney.
Driven by data. Driven by technology. Driven by community development. Driven by the need to get results for your project. SM Graves Associates. Delivering real estate development to you, including project management and pre-development services, with a keen focus on delivering community-oriented projects. We build profitable projects that respond to the needs of your neighborhood. Join the SMG family. Find us at smgravesassociates.com.
Wow, that's pretty impactful. Now, I'm just kind of curious. I'm not sure if you can say, but were some of your early investors also those folks that you helped early on from your position as a...
Yeah, so kind of like when did I decide to do this? So my path was I had an MVP. And so again, because I guess this is for entrepreneurs, how did I do it? Right. Um, Little backstory, post 2008, I was no longer in love with the financial services world. I mean, I don't want to poo-poo anybody who's still in there, but just for me, like the love was gone. I mean, 2008, I think we know the story, right? And so I was actively thinking about, what am I going to do to not be here? And so my wife and I, we bought a business called Climb High. If you're from Burlington, they were, I should say, they were the preeminent kind of outdoor gear store back in the day. And at the time, they were what I knew of them, they were the main importer of every European brand. Long story short, they were up for sale. Mammoet had bought Climb High. It wasn't a great fit. Kind of take that in that thought, most acquirers and acquirees don't make it. So I think that's foreshadowing. And the brand was, basically we bought the URL, we just bought the intellectual rights. We bought the business for like $30,000 in 2010. Yeah, 2011. It was literally April Fool's Day. We signed all the documents, foreshadowing also. And so we had to relaunch a website. Did I know anything other than a consumer of that time? And remember, this is like pre-iPhone. Well, I guess maybe iPhone is just starting. This is really like internet is kind of mature, but not really. There's a lot of services. To start a website, it used to cost $30,000. I mean, obviously you could still spend that easily, but Wix wasn't around. I mean, so many things weren't around. And so I had to learn how to like launch a website basically with no money. And so I learned how to manage that site. And so Climb High was an utter disaster. I call it my real life MBA, where I probably spent as much as, an Harvard MBA would have cost. I just lost that money in real life, but I learned a lot. So because of that learning, I was able to mostly on my own, start the website. So when I started Easy Probate, I actually went on what was then, I think it was called, what was it called? It's not called Upwork, but it was whatever the freelance hire a freelancer was then. Something else will come to me. And because I'm from Guatemala, I speak Spanish. I was like, I could probably get somebody from Guatemala who codes. And at the time, I was able to hire somebody for $10 an hour. And so again, cheat code, I was able to get kind of that really, really low cost. And I did a lot of the work too. So we were able to get our first automation, kind of a proof point. We automated one state, which was Pennsylvania. And so I could prove the concept that, yes, I can get a questionnaire in and spit out the forms. But at that time, we just had a functioning marketing site that somebody could give us their information. And then I had to manually, basically hand type every form.
Wow.
Basically copy paste. It's not like I'm typing with just copy paste. Name goes here, address goes there kind of situation.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. So this is 2012, right? 2010 to 2012, you kind of built it.
No. So I had the idea come. So I become the executor. I start Climb High 2011. Again, utter disaster, but I learned how to code. I learned how to run a website. When I started Climb High, like Google Shopping was free, just to give you like a context. And so I knew how to attract a website. I think I was dumb enough too to not understand the difference between B2B and B2C. I was like, this is a consumer problem. Let's go to the consumer. So we launched a B2C product, direct to consumer. And so we, officially October 2016, we spun up Easy Probate for the first time. I remember I had a paywall. You had to pay me first before you get the questionnaire. That was an utter disaster. I had no clients willing to pay first. Finally, December, maybe early January, it had to be December. And we were like, hey, you know what? Let's remove the paywall. I'll just invoice. Let's get people to give us their information, which at the time, if you think about it, I'm asking for name, address, children, social security number of the deceased, not living.
I mean, a built-in-one tracing triangulation.
Yeah.
Pieces of information.
So it was, I mean, it's kind
No weird identity theft scam if that was what you were doing. Yeah.
it's kind of a miracle it even worked. So, and so I got my first paying customer. It was January 3rd. Can I remember the name? Peggy Haynes, from Colorado. I don't remember the county, but Colorado. Peggy was my first paid customer. And I guess the rest is history. Like, then, by the time I raised money, by the time I had that like moment, like, hey, let's really do this, I probably was making like $40,000 a year from doing this on the side.
Yeah.
And then the first person I helped, my good friend whose mother was my client, and then his grandma, her mom died. I remember having lunch with him. I was like, hey, this is working. This is what he says to me. I was like, dude, I would totally invest in this. You should. Obviously, Shark Tank was really popular. It's not like he's a VC. He was like, and so I was like, oh. And so that was, of course, somebody made fun of me the other day because I generally remember things via sports. And so that was when the Eagles were in the Super Bowl. So my son and I, for Christmas, we went to the Eagles were hosting the Raiders. Super cold. We lost. No, we barely won. And I remember my wife and I had that classic conversation of like, where do we want to be? But I remember telling her, I was like, I think I'm going to do this. Like, I want to do this. I want to create something. I want to get out of the financial world. And so that's when I decided to like really go gung ho. So then I applied to launch BT. That would have been 2018.
Yeah.
And that's really when the rest is history for Easy Probate.
Yeah. So now we're catching up to when you and I met. Because I think you were in Launch VT when you and I met.
Yeah. So I remember this interaction well because I don't know if you remember. First of all, you're gonna understand. I am extremely. I call myself almost a zealot in the sense of probate, right? Like, you had actually, frankly, the brilliant idea when I was just too dumb to listen. You actually said to me, "Oh, you should partner with attorneys." And I got all blah, 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 attorneys suck and blah, 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 blah. And so I remember, like, I was so focused on attorneys are the problem. I need to get rid of them. I want to destroy all attorneys. This needs to be a direct-to-consumer, do-it-yourself. Because I think what happens with entrepreneurs is that's what I wanted, right? I'm a do-it-yourselfer. We're all electric vehicles. And I installed myself the, level 2 charger. I know, and I'm curious enough to know, but that's not most people. And so, yes, we met early on in my launch VT stage. I forget it was pre or post, but I was very much very wrong, but yet it worked.
Well, I love that you're outlining that too, because it falls into a theme that we talk about a lot on here for entrepreneurs is you got to fall in love with the problem, not the solution. Right. And, you have the idea, you build the thing and it's your baby, right? It's your baby, yeah. It's the solution. And it's a solution that we think the world needs. But sometimes you have to be able to step back, look at it in context and see what the real problem is that's being solved in order to finesse that into something that's a true market fit.
Well, the marketplace has to see it as a problem worth solving. Even when people can identify and say, yeah, sure, you're solving a problem, but if people don't feel enough of a pain point and then aren't enough of those people willing to part with money to solve that problem, then there really is no problem in the marketplace, Yeah,
but sometimes you get this weird estuary where the marketplace is so painful. The market currently is so painful for people to actually use. Enough people want to use your crappy, dumb product that's not fully yet baked because you are a lifeline. And again, for the record, we were successful. Like ultimately we did over 5,000 probate cases, saved people about 45 million in legal fees, right? But why do I think my product was sucky and why do I think I was dumb? It is the entire time people were telling me, hey, I want an attorney. I just can't afford the upfront cost. Or I want something like an attorney to do everything for me because I'm just too overwhelmed. And I was so kind of like, no, do it my way. Like, this is what I want you to have. And so that's why I didn't have product market fit. And then the pandemic happened. We did launch during the pandemic. lots of reasons, but we didn't launch our first like limited scope attorney plan. So we started to offer attorneys at a flat fee. And so that, I mean, I'm not dumb, and I'm obviously like capable of listening, sometimes begrudgingly, to what's working and what's not. And so we did start on the path of like offering the attorney. And so let me just credit, I think, the greatest modern philosopher of our day, Colin Cowherd. I don't know if you've ever heard of. Actually, I'm kidding. No, I'm not kidding. He's a real person. He's a sports talk person. So I'm kind of joking about, but he has a couple of great sayings that I really have gravitated to. You don't want to be right. You want to get it right. As in, like, it's more important to get it right than to be right. Most people want to be right, which means that you dig in your heels and you don't change. And so it's about the process. It is about this goal. The one thing that I think I was really good at is I was the client. Like, I was the administrator. I went through it. I knew exactly what they're dealing with. I know exactly what they want. I know what the finished product needs to be. And so that was a big leg up for me from really anybody.
You knew what the customer end game needed to be because you felt the pain point. You could empathize with that situation. Yeah. Of course, we upped the ante with a probate challenge when real estate's involved. Mm-hmm. Bigger asset, typically. I mean, for that main reason. You gave me an interesting story when you and I first met last fall. And the context of it was, people within the Great Migration. Now, this goes well beyond that group of African Americans that made it north during the 20th century, but it's an interesting for context, and it gives a little bit of size and scope that suggests the greater problem that we're talking about. And for the listener, those of us in real estate, especially a small box residential real estate. And really, you don't have to be in real estate, I guess, for this. Everybody can drive through just about every neighborhood in America, any working class, middle class, or upper class neighborhood, and go, how come there's always a house of horrors? In virtually every neighborhood, there's at least one house of horrors, right? It's been sitting abandoned for a long period of time. It's got all the trees growing around it, especially mature neighborhoods. And there's always an interesting story behind that. And you give one really just wonderful example of that in the Philly area.
Yeah, so what you're talking about, there's two terms for this, which is what is commonly called heir property. That's like what the South would use. Philadelphia, I don't know if they coined the term, but they call it tangle title. And so if you kind of roll back 1 minute, I think we all have at least heard the inequities caused by like the legal system. Not that the legal system itself is to blame, but the accessibility. Let's just use like O.J. Simpson, right? Without his wealth, power, I don't know if you've seen the documentary. Don't want to play an attorney. I did not stay in a Holiday Inn Express last night, but let's face it, obviously guilty, right? But he was able to buy his way, for lack of a better term. Obviously, there are very unique culture dynamics that happen outside of his wealth and power, but I think it's going to play into what I'm about to say. And so those who can't afford an attorney, by definition, don't do the legal action, right? So it's always a hard thing to be like, well, how do you measure those who didn't do something? It's right. Proving the counterfactual. So we can see it in evidence in the stories. If you were to Google heir property, tons of articles about Southern, mostly, people of color who were great grandfather or, some distant relative owned property. They died. For lots of reasons, really affordability, in my opinion, they did not probate the estate. So the deed, after multiple generations, are still in the deceased person's name. And so then the family members effectively inherit that informally. So somebody still lives in the house, somebody's caretaking the farm, whatever, but no one actually owns it. And in the South, then what happens is somebody of wealth and power, obviously typically white, comes in and does a partition, finagles the legal system and literally steals the property. That's hyperbole, but in effect, I believe, and it's proven lots of stuff for that. It's robbery, legal robbery, that is. And so Philadelphia is another example where Civil War, there was the Great Migration, which was probably like circa what, probably 70 plus or minus through 1930, 40s.
Yeah, some people measure right up to the early 1970s. It's sort of petered out.
And so what's unique about that era is, I mean, obviously, let's be very frank, slavery ended, right? And so people of color, the only document that could ever be proven they existed may be the first deed that they ever had. So when they die and they don't know, and nobody knows whose family member is either where or who, right? Because of what happened. And so many properties, then after they moved, they own property, they die, and nobody probates it.
Yeah.
And so in Philadelphia specifically, there's over, I guess, estimated about 13 to 14,000 properties in Philadelphia proper city, metropolis area, like the zip codes, Philadelphia, of property that is tangle title, where somebody owns the property who's been dead more than 21 years. And to put the context even more like national, there's $90 billion right now of unclaimed property that has grown every year. This is the Byron stat. So it's my estimate that about 80% of that is because someone died, right? You die with a stock portfolio, you die with a bank account, and then nobody finds it. Right now, there's no way to like cross-reference, hey, does this Social Security number have accounts anywhere? There's no place to find out. So then that goes to unclaimed property, and every year that just grows exponentially. So those are two good data points of the scale of the affordability problem.
Wow.
People,
and that's just market value of those properties, $90 billion. When you
no, yeah, this is unclaimed property. This is like money in a bank that got moved to the Secretary of State at name estate.
Correct.
So
when you factor in things like it, like
real
most of this property, any percentage of it, property taxes aren't paid. Even if they are paid, the market value of these properties stays pretty minimal, especially over time, because it's becoming a decrepit property. So there's also this idea that whether it's the inheritors that end up getting the property, or in some other way you simply get it out of, if there are no known inheritors, you need to get these properties back on the tax rolls, back functioning as homes again, because we need the homes. The cities and towns need the property taxes. Now we're talking over the long haul, trillions of dollars in value, because you want to get them back online, so to speak.
100%. Yeah. I mean, obviously there's back taxes owed. Sometimes these places were so decrepit, the city or township bulldozes them over. And so then there's, because of blight. And so, yeah, there's a lot of both lost revenue forward and by definition, not being paid.
Well,
so I want to kind of start to wrap this up, a little bit of a teaser, because we're gonna talk to you again, Byron, and get a little bit more of your story, because you've got some real key things going on right now that we're gonna want to wait for to talk about. But let's just kind of wrap this up with your exit of Easy Probate, and really when did that happen? How did that all kind of come to fruition? And then I'm really excited to share more in the future about really some of the solutions that you're continuing to build to address some of these problems that we're starting to talk about here.
Yeah. So, as much as you can fail your way forward, which is its own ways could describe us, but no, again, we had a largely successful, proven process. I could probate. I mean, I call myself the most important man in probate. So I think that's a title that sticks. I think anybody in this space knows who I am. If there's ever a question about anything, I usually get a call from somebody who said, so-and-so introduced me. So from the knowing how to do it, I don't think there's a person with more knowledge than me. However, the business thing is always a different animal. So if you think about almost like any tech company that boomed during COVID, by definition, we were the most direct, other than like a hospital, maybe direct beneficiary of COVID that there exists. people
People were dying.
die, and then obviously used to be probated, right? So what was happening to us was prior to COVID, our average person coming to our website or coming for help was like 60, 65-year-old female with very, very little like internet and or online comfortability, right? Like, think of your grandma kind of situation. Because of COVID, and then the average age of death is like 80, 82, right? So during COVID, the average age of death dropped by more than 10 years. So that meant like a 67-year-old dying, which meant we were getting 40, 50-year-olds, sometimes 30-year-olds to the website saying, hey, my mom died, my brother died, my wife died during COVID. I need help with probate. And so the online adoption just skyrocketed. I mean, almost to the month after the COVID vaccine happened, our business went just right down. So as people stopped dying in that specific way, which meant a younger person was no longer dying, which meant then no longer was our age of user coming to the website as young, where we're back to the standard of, kind of old 60-year-old lady come to the website. And by then the concept of like, they don't know who we are. We didn't have a budget. I mean, we were everything shoestring, right? And so it was almost too good to be true. Like we would get the complaint, like, I want to use you, but it feels like a scam. It's too good to be true. And so we were having lower adoption. So I remember thinking like, okay, I either have to raise a crap ton of money, and no way can I grow because it'll be a miracle to keep the same pace that we were on because we're not going to have COVID, right? This is now the end of 2021. So facing 2022 with such a huge artificial kind of growth, even though obviously it happened. So then not really what was happening, but in between I had gotten offers. Hey, would you ever consider? And so it was kind of right place, right time. I had two competing offers. I was able to effectively choose, who I wanted to say yes to. And, I was able to, I felt like I had a fiduciary responsibility to my shareholders. I was like, well, I need to do right by them. I don't need to like be right or have a specific outcome that has to happen. So, when this was the classic acqui-hire, don't get me wrong, cash was exchanged, things were fine, stock was promised and or, going to be vested. So from my shareholders' perspective, like they made out awesome. I think they more or less 5X. They got to choose cash or stock. So a lot of them chose combo or all or one or the other. And then I was acquired and hired by now my former employer.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a perfect place for us to leave off because we've got a lot to dig into continuing that story, I think, and hopefully you'll be at liberty to share more the next time we speak as well. And
what I can share is just effectively what I've been doing since I left. So I left my former employer April, I guess, 2023. Yeah. Also, a sports marker. The Eagles lost to the Chiefs that year. I remember as I was battling me to stay, I remember like not loving that Super Bowl weekend because it was in my head. Anyways, and so I have been talking to anybody who would listen about we need to provide financing to legal services. So I can say that we innovated, and we basically for the last couple of years have been financing legal cases, quiet title, stopping foreclosure, like you name it. We've been financing, working with attorneys, working with kind of enterprise level clients, where if you could finance the deal, unlocks the money, obviously then. So we've been doing that for a bit. We learned a lot, kind of made us go into the lab, as they say. And so, I think in about a month, we're going to have some really cool announcements about what we're doing, what we're launching. And so, we're excited about that.
And that's Scrivener. So the current company, Scrivener, folks can find it online. They could use your services today. But we're going to dive in a little deeper the next time around and really get into what Scrivener is, the solution you're providing, and this bigger picture too about how it can really change the experience, change the whole probate world as we know it today, taking your knowledge and experience and really multiplying it through software and creative financial services.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us today, Byron. Really appreciate your experience and your knowledge, and really happy to share your story with our audience, and really look forward to continuing this conversation.
Well, thank you. Looking forward to it.
Find Innovato 2 on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and subscribe to Interchain Live on YouTube for video podcasts. Innovato 2 is a collaboration of Interchain Live and M the Media Project.